In this video, I want to explore a short book by John Milbank. It's called The Suspended Middle, and it's a work about theology, specifically the Nouvelle Théologie of French Catholic thought in the 20th century. But I think it touches on a number of interesting things to do with the nature of knowledge and philosophy more broadly that I think could make it of interest to anyone, even if you've got no particular interest in theology in general. John Milbank is famous, perhaps infamous, for being one of the founders of the radical orthodoxy movement, a movement rooted in Anglicanism, but specifically Anglo-Catholicism, which ever since the 19th century has sought to resource some of the more Catholic aspects of the Church of England and its heritage. And I'm not concerned to defend what John Milbank is saying in this book exactly, or the positions he reaches. I'm not saying anyone should believe them as such. I think they open interesting conversations and problems for theology more generally, and that's why I'm picking it up. So to start with Henri de Lubac, his basic idea that Milbank is discussing is the interaction between nature and grace, which he would say many Catholic theologians of his time had misunderstood how these two things interacted within the work of Thomas Aquinas, the most famous Catholic theologian of the medieval era. For him, these neo-scholastic theologians, as he called them, thought that Aquinas was presenting these two different realms: nature, which is the created order that can exist in and of itself, has its own reason, its own rationality, can achieve things in and of itself, and grace, which God has to kind of gratuitously add on to nature to provide salvation. Now, what Milbank explores and develops is how this sharp distinction, separation, for him at least, could very much lead to secular thought, thinking without God, because if the world of nature is its own sphere that doesn't actually need grace to achieve many things, well, why can't it just stay within that sphere? And for Milbank, the Reformation, the rejection of many of the doctrines of the Catholic Church by reformers like Martin Luther, John Calvin, and more recently Karl Barth, sort of made this even worse, established a huge gulf between a totally depraved mankind and a distant transcendent God. And for Milbank, what de Lubac was trying to do was to say, well, no, nature is always already participating in grace. God's grace is already at work within the created order, giving God's self as a gift to be returned to him. So for Milbank, one of his major contentions is that reason and faith aren't two separate things. They're essentially one and the same. And perhaps inevitably, he ends up pushing things towards what's known as universalism, the idea that all people will be saved, that finally no one will be in hell, and everyone is always already orientated towards God, and things just sort of get in the way, as it were, of that, and just need to be kind of cleared away. So it's an incredibly sunny view of things as compared to someone like John Calvin, who believed that some are elected to salvation, but most will be ordained to damnation. And there's kind of, nothing that can be done about that, basically. Now, the title, The Suspended Middle, refers to what another Catholic theologian, von Balthasar, said about de Lubac's work, that it's sort of suspended somewhere between philosophy and theology. It's not quite one or the other. And that kind of interests me because it makes me think of Frederick Jameson's contention about theory, this sort of body of discourse developed in France after World War II, as against philosophy. For Jameson, theory is almost an attempt to think without philosophy, without metaphysics, in a different way altogether. So maybe there's some kind of crossover there in trying to overcome these problems of knowledge, because I don't know if Milbank spells this out exactly, but I think one of the key difficulties of separating nature and grace so radically, particularly under the Calvinistic view, wherein mankind is totally depraved, can never reach God by his own effort and so on, is always a troubling question of how is that gulf breached, and how would you ever know that you have crossed that gulf? Now, Milbank doesn't take it in this direction, but I think for me, it's very pertinent to ask these questions because there's a classic Calvinist problem of how would you ever know you're saved? How would you know that you've received that salvation? Because Calvin taught that some people might think they're saved, they might think they're Christian and act as if they are, but ultimately it's like a temporary enlightenment that is taken away from them. And I suppose it's when epistemology, the problem of knowledge, is taken as central that these problems emerge. When Christianity seeks to have an apologetic based on, well, this is the way we find true knowledge by looking to a transcendent source. Obviously, that's already assuming we know what knowledge is, or things like truth or goodness. And that's far from certain. Ever since one of Plato's dialogues, Theaetetus, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's never been actually self-evident what knowledge even is. As Plato explores, is it just perception? Is it making a judgment? Or is it a judgment with an explanation? And as he shows in this dialogue through the mouth of Socrates, all three of those concepts have real difficulties. So I think forms of Christianity that start with this problem, that want to get beyond just grounding belief in some kind of mystical intuition, just asserting because God has revealed it to me, that want to say something like, well, this is the best way to epistemologically ground our understanding of the world, kind of start from certain assumptions in the first place, and within their very system create their own problems. For if we are totally depraved, how do we ever know or prove to ourselves that we really have received the Holy Spirit that leads us into truth, that helps us read the Bible correctly? There's always that room for doubt or uncertainty. I would find it hard these days to see how it wouldn't lead to at least a kind of agnosticism. And I suppose Milbank's project seeks to overcome that entirely by saying, well, we're always already graced as created beings. The whole world is ultimately directed to God, and we can just go with that, which is again very sunny in many ways, but for me raises other problems, because obviously not everyone agrees on things, and how would you ascertain whose reason is being used rightly, or who's letting certain obstacles get in the way of divine reason pointing them in the right direction? It's very unclear to me how you would negotiate that. And maybe he has indicated that in other essays. I've read some things by him, but not by no means not everything. And maybe this is why his own form of Christianity is such an unusual mash of tradition, of liturgical forms and respect for the church fathers in some sense, but also many innovations and eccentric doctrines that no church of the past centuries would recognise. So for me, this book opens up important questions, but I'm not sure can provide any particular way forward for theology that's satisfying, for me at least. Now, maybe you have some suggestions, maybe you think there are solutions that I'm missing, or John Milbank is missing. Feel free to share them in the comments. But I want to pick up some of these concerns in future videos in a very different key, because this connection to the idea of a kind of thought that's not quite philosophy and not quite theology is something that deeply fascinates me.